Hi, I'm Ethan, and I'm addicted to ultralight fishing. In fact, I'm so addicted to ultralight fishing that for the next 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to talk exclusively about fishing line. That's right, folks. Not a lot of people out there want to talk about fishing line for 15 minutes, but I'm happy to. I'm happy to because I'm passionate about this subject. When it comes to ultralight fishing, the line you choose plays a huge role. I would argue it's probably the most important gear decision you're going to make. You know, if you get a decent reel, you get a decent rod, but you put the wrong line on it, it can really mess it up. It can mess the whole thing up. Getting a good line is going to lead to better casting, better bite detection, so on and so forth. So we're going to talk about that. In today's video, I'm going to start with some of the most simple options, some of the cheaper options. I'm going to work my way to some of the more advanced options. I'm going to talk about each of them and kind of the pros and cons. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to talk about my personal preferences, some of my favorite lines out there, and some of the things that I plan to do in the future. Because the reality is, over the last several years, I've tested a ton of line, and I'm going to continue to test more line in the future because there's constantly new stuff on the horizon. There's constantly new advancements with technology and with all the gear out there. And I like to test them, and I like to share my opinions. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first line we're going to talk about is the good old-fashioned monofilament, otherwise known as mono. This has been around for a long time, and the nice thing about monofilament is it's widely available and it's highly affordable. Now this one is Suffix Elite. This is a great line. I've used this in the past. I've been meaning to spool this one up for a long time, haven't done so yet, but this is a 4-pound variety, high vis yellow. It's gonna be great for crappie fishing. I also like Trilene XL. If you go anywhere that carries fishing gear, you're gonna find Trilene XL. You can't go wrong with it. Now, monofilament is obviously the most basic. It has got higher stretch, which means that it's going to have lower sensitivity, generally speaking. The other thing I've noticed about monofilament is I don't feel like it lasts as long. I think there's a couple of things that might be impacting that. Number one, it does potentially absorb a little bit of water when you take it out and fish with it. It also, I believe, gets damaged by sunlight. So over time, it's probably gonna wear out and you'll have to re-spool. This is like 330 yards. I wanna say that this thing costed like 10 bucks. So it's a pretty affordable option just to get spooled up and on the water. All things considered, if you want to go with a monofilament line, there's really nothing wrong with it. Some of the other options I'm going to talk about today I think are going to be a little bit more advanced and probably a little bit better options, but I've used mono in the past. I'll use it again in the future. It's a good option. After monofilament, we have copolymer, which copolymer is kind of like a hybrid monofilament, sometimes called fluorocarbon coated monofilament. It's basically a combination of monofilament and fluorocarbon. I'm going to talk about fluoro next, but this Trilene Sensation specifically, you guys, if you've been watching my videos, you've probably heard me talk about this. This is an awesome option. Now, one thing that I was looking at and I was trying to get a feel for is whether or not copolymer and monofilament have the same diameter. In this case, I looked at Trilene Sensation 2-pound and it's 0.01 or 0.15 millimeters. And then if I look at Trilene XL, which is their standard mono, it's slightly lower diameter. So actually the copolymer is a little bit thicker. But when I've looked at a lot of different options out there, copolymer and monofilament are pretty similar in diameter. The reason that's important is the lower diameter you go, the higher your casting distance. It has a huge impact on casting distance. I would say, all things considered, copolymer and monofilament are likely going to be neck and neck with regards to casting distance and line diameter. Now, more importantly, the reason I really like copolymer more than monofilament is because this stuff is strong. It is strong as an ox. I don't know what it is, but I can spool this up. It lasts a long time. It doesn't seem to get too much abrasion on it. It doesn't snap. It just seems like it's built to last. It seems weird. Like, this is 2-pound. I'm telling you, this stuff, it's bulletproof. I love this line right here. And just like monofilament, it's extremely cost effective. So for me, if I just want to do some ultralight fishing and I don't want to get into all the braids or I don't want to try all the fancier stuff, I just want something that's going to work, this is still one of my favorite options out there. I haven't popped into this spool because I've been playing with a lot of other lines out there, but this is definitely going to go on a reel at some point in the future because you just can't go wrong, my friends. Before I go to fluorocarbon, I will say one thing about copolymer. It doesn't seem like it's as widely available. There's a couple of other options that I've played with. P-Line Fluoroclear, which is fluorocarbon coated mono. I don't like this one as much. I think it might be a little bit lower diameter, 0.13, but it did seem to snap a little bit easier. And then there's the Yozuri Hybrid. I've used this a few times. This works pretty good, but This one right here just seems to work a little bit better than these other options. So I would say probably need to experiment a little bit more, but from everything I've seen, this is my personal favorite option with regards to copolymer. One other thing to note with both monofilament and copolymer is I feel like they're very manageable lines. I get them spooled up. They don't seem to give me too many issues. Every now and again, you might have some memory issues, some line twists, so on and so forth. But generally speaking, the fact that they have a little bit of stretch, it seems like you get them on the spool and they don't have a lot of issues. Copolymer has less stretch than monofilament, which makes it just a little bit more sensitive. Fluorocarbon, otherwise known as fluoro. You know, fluorocarbon is actually my favorite line for bass fishing, but oddly enough, for ultralight, I don't use it that much. This is some fancy Daiwa stuff, J Fluoro Samurai. This is a 2-pound, very thin, but what I found with this is I snapped it a lot, so I haven't really used it a whole lot. I got this 3-pound Super FC Sniper from Sunline, a little bit, nicer line, and I've been using this a little bit more because I do like it. But generally speaking, when I have the choice, I'm still going to lean copolymer over fluorocarbon. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the copolymer has just a little bit of stretch. And I've found that little bit of stretch just acts as a little bit of a shock absorption. So if you're setting a hook, I find that this is just gonna snap a little bit easier because it doesn't have that stretch. It's just a little more brittle in my experience. Now, they say that fluorocarbon is quite abrasion resistant, and I do find that to be the case with bass fishing. But when you get to that sub 4-pound test, it just doesn't have a lot of margin of error. If you hit it on something, it's more likely to snap in my experience. Again, I like this line. I've been using it more. I'm going to continue to use it in the future because there are some big advantages. It's highly invisible. If we're talking about ultralight fishing, you're using a micro presentation, you might be targeting finicky trout or something like that. Using something that's really invisible is a great way of getting bit. The other thing is it does sink. And it's got that low stretch, so it's very sensitive. So it really is a good option. I think that generally speaking, as an ultralight angler though, you're gonna have to be a little bit more careful with your drag, and you're gonna have to be a little bit more careful with your hook sets when you're getting to that 2-pound class line. Next up, we have braided fishing line. Braided fishing line is great. This is 50-pound. I don't want 50-pound for ultralight. In fact, 3 to 6-pound test for braid is usually what I'm using. For the copolymers, monofilaments, and fluorocarbons, I'm usually talking 2 to 4. Some people might want to go up to 6, but for braid, we're talking 3 to 6 pound. The reason I wouldn't go below 3 is because I don't think I would physically be able to see it. Braid is really, really low diameter. It's probably the most low diameter option on the market. The interesting thing about braid, as the name suggests, is the fact that it's numerous strands of line wrapped around each other. Here we have a 4, PEX4. Here we have an 8. 8 strands, 4 strands. Technically speaking, the lower the strand count, the more abrasion resistant it will be. The higher strand counts will likely be less abrasion resistant, but they're probably going to be smoother and cast further. So I tend to use 8-strand braid more often than not. Both of them are going to be less abrasion resistant than some of the other lines I've talked about today. Braid is pretty susceptible to abrasion, so if you're dragging it across a bunch of zebra mussels, you're probably going to be cutting that braid up and it's going to snap. Other than that though, braid is super strong. Like if you're just pulling it, you're going to have a really hard time snapping braided fishing line. It is extremely strong. The one thing with braid that I need to mention is the fact that I found it to be highly inconsistent. So you pick up one brand and then you pick up another, and they can be night and day different. Some of these brands can be extremely wiry and they don't cast far at all. Then on the other side, you've got some that are extremely smooth and they're supple and they cast really far. With regards to ultralight fishing, it's really important to get those lines that are a lot smoother and more supple because that's going to allow you to cast micro presentations much further, and that's extremely important. So, some of my personal favorites that I've had success with: Phoenix Iron Feather, Spro Finesse Braid, Daiwa J Braid X8. This Cast King 13X is actually pretty good too. A lot of people also like Veravos. That's a fancy line as well. There's a list of great lines out there, but I would say just try to make sure you're finding something that's a little bit smoother and you won't have too many issues. The lower diameter you get, the more casting distance you're probably going to get as well. This X braid is actually pretty good too. Nothing wrong with it. The other things to think about with braid is you can get different colors. I love the fact that you can get a high vis. This is a buoyant line, generally speaking, and then you get that high vis. So it's really easy to see the line. You know, once you get it spooled up, you see it and you can detect bites extremely well with braided fishing line. It's extremely sensitive. But because you're going to have a higher visibility line, for me personally, I like to tie a leader. So what I like to do is I like to grab like a 5 or a 6 pound braid, and then I'm gonna run it to about 6 or 7 foot of 4 pound copolymer. Now, that to me has been a really, really good setup because that copolymer is gonna have a little bit of stretch, and that's gonna be kind of some of that shock absorption I was talking about. But then I'm still gonna maintain a ton of sensitivity through the braid, and I'm gonna be able to see it. So I'm gonna be able to see when my line moves or jumps, and I'm gonna be able to detect bites better. Because it has low stretch or no stretch, when I set the hook, I know that I'm gonna bury that hook in the fish's mouth. So all things considered, I would say braid is my personal favorite. It's what I use most, and it just feels right for me. With that being said, as much as I love braided fishing line, there's something else I wanna talk about, and that's polyester, otherwise known as ester. Now, I've only used this one so far, but I've got 2 other spools that I have been meaning to rig up. Ester is a really interesting line. It's extremely low diameter. It's lower diameter than fluorocarbon, monofilament, copolymer. Not quite as low diameter as braid, but it's a 1-strand line. It sinks, and it's really, really sensitive. This stuff is great. I've got this one. This is a 1.75 pound line. Generally speaking, what I've seen with esters is you can get 1.5 to 3 pound lines, and you know, that's gonna be super low diameter. So for those of you who are hyper into ultralight fishing, like using 1/80th ounce jigs, 1/64th ounce jigs, really the micro presentations, this is something to really consider. Now, it's not for everyone. In fact, this isn't a very common line. You know, I had to buy these on a Japanese website. These are JDM lines. You can see on the back, it's all in Japanese. I don't know what the heck it says. I don't know much about it, but I know one thing. For ultralight fishing, this stuff's really good. I have heard several people talk about the fact that they also like to run a shock leader on these as well. So you might use, you know, an ester and then tie a leader to a monofilament or a copolymer to have a little bit more of that stretch to where you're not snapping the line as often. I've just been using it straight, and that's been fine for me. I'm probably going to continue to experiment with it that way, but I have noticed that the ones that I've found, this is a high vis yellow. This one's red. I think this one's actually meant to be a night fishing line. This one's a Veravas. And then I've got this Daiwa stuff, and this one's like a white. So not as invisible as like a fluorocarbon. That being said, it's so low diameter that I don't think fish are gonna notice it very well. I'm gonna continue to play with this more this year. That's one of the big things I wanted to talk about is moving into 2025, I need to get these other ones spooled up and do more testing with ester. So that way, a couple years from now, I'll have a lot better understanding of what's all out there and what my personal opinions of the ester is. But so far, looks extremely promising. I've heard nothing but good things from seriously talented ultralight anglers. So I trust it's gonna be a really good option for me. One of the other things I really did want to talk about is when it comes to making a choice, you need to think about something that's going to be manageable for you. So if you have a hard time seeing the really low diameter lines, which is a totally normal thing for people, you might not want to go with some of these low diameter esters or fluorocarbons. You might be better off with like a 4 pound high vis monofilament because it's something that's going to be a little bit more manageable for you. That is one thing that I get a lot of messages about, and that's why there's really not one right or wrong answer. There's a variety of answers, but each answer is going to be slightly different depending on your style as an angler and what you're looking to accomplish. For me, I have a lot of experience with the really low diameter lines, and even though they're a little bit less manageable, we'll say, I find that they are really beneficial for the micro stuff that I'm doing, so I like to use them. Moving into 2025 and beyond, I plan to use a lot of braided fishing line and a lot of ester fishing line. I'm probably not going to use quite as much mono, copolymer, or fluoro in the future outside of copolymer as a leader. Other than that, those are going to be my 2 primary line types, and I think that those are going to cover down on a lot of situations. I think that the ester is going to be really good for like a slow falling micro presentation. The braid is extremely sensitive, and I like to use it for just about everything else. I think it'll be great for the drop shots, for any jigs, so on and so forth. I don't know what I'm missing here. I just rambled about fishing line for however long I've been talking. If you have questions, drop them in the comments below. I will do my best to get back to them as quickly as possible. Thank you so very much for watching this video. Let's catch some fish in 2025, baby.